Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to do a charcoal drawing of a white-tailed deer. Let's start. I'm going to use the same technique and the same materials like the previous couple of drawings. I'm going to use Koh-i-Noor charcoal pencils, some vine charcoal, and I'm going to work on a Fabriano sketching paper about 9 × 12 inches in size. The idea with these antlers at the top is I want to create some contrast around them by making the background darker there. And to do that I'm going to shade that part of the background with a piece of vine charcoal and try to create something that looks like distant shapes of trees. But like I said, these need to be darker than the antlers themselves. This will be a little bit tricky because the antlers are kind of thin, small shapes, and I'm going to need to create very fine, precise, clean edges around them. And vine charcoal as a material is kind of crumbly and softer and easier to blend, and I'm going to blend it with a brush to soften these shapes a little bit. So in order to clean up the edges and to make those antlers stand out nicely against that darker background, I will need to find a way to clean up their shape, and I will need to work with erasers. Now the reason why I blended these trees in the background so much is because I don't really want to have very well defined shapes, and I don't really want to have too much texture there. That's because if I put too much effort into defining individual shapes in the background, it would be a little bit too distracting and it would drown the shape of those antlers, and I really need them to stand out, and I need the whole figure of the deer to stand out against the background, especially that top part. So this contrast at the top will be very important, and one of the ways to emphasize that contrast is not going to be merely creating a contrast in value, but also contrast in the amount of detail. So the background there, those trees in the distance, they are going to have to be a little bit blurrier, whereas all of the details on the main subject, everything will have to have a little bit more texture, everything will have to be a little bit more elaborate, so that the main subject would stand out. So I will keep softening those background trees, but at the same time I will try to make sure that during the process of blending and softening I don't lose too much value, because I need a substantial amount of value in the background so that those lighter shapes of antlers would stand out. And as you can see, in order to clean up the edges, I'm using a combination of a pencil and an eraser. I used a Koh-i-Noor pencil eraser, and I'm using a Koh-i-Noor silky black pencil. If you don't have that one, you can just use any black colored pencil, or maybe you can try using one of those matte graphite pencils. That would also work with charcoal, but I prefer to use a combination of black pencil and charcoal pencils. And the ones that I'm using are Koh-i-Noor pencils, but like I said, you can use any other brand. So I've done most of the work on the antlers. I'm going to be refining them a little bit more a little bit later. Right now I'm moving on some of the other details. I did the eye there. And for some precision, some of the precision blending, I'm using these tortillons because they have a finer tip and they allow you to blend in those smaller, finer places. Now, I'm going to start from left to right now in this middle part of the body, and I'm starting with the tail. It's called a white-tailed deer, but the tail isn't completely white. It's mostly of dark brown color, but around the edges, around the tip, it's of lighter color. It's covered with white fur, I suppose. Now, the reference will be in the description, so you can check it out. And I will make some tiny changes to it, not so much to the main subject, except for the usual simplification. But I will mostly make the changes to the background because, as I've already explained, I added those darker shapes in the background at the top because my idea immediately was to create a contrast between the darker background and those lighter antlers so that they would stand out against the background. We'll see how it'll work. You let me know what you think. But right now I'm doing a little bit more of the work on the texture of the fur. As usual, when it comes to drawing fur, you have to pay attention to the length of the fur and the direction of the fur, and you have to match the length and the direction of the fur with the length and the direction of your pencil strokes. I'm using the charcoal pencil for the most part here. So like I said, this is a Koh-i-Noor soft charcoal pencil, and once I do most of the work on the texture of the fur, it's not going to look that great, but once you apply the blending tools on top of that, it'll look a lot softer and a lot more natural. Now in some places the fur is very, very short, so in order to imitate the texture of that short fur, it's difficult to draw a bunch of such tiny marks. Sometimes I just choose to drag my pencil to create something that looks like short fur. But you can see that as I'm working on top of that with a brush, the brush isn't removing all of the texture, rather it's just softening it, and we still have some of those lines and some of that fine texture in place, but it becomes softer, it becomes a little bit darker in value. I fill in those light spaces in between my pencil marks, and that's just the beginning of the process, because then I can go back to working on top of that with a pencil, refining the details, adding some of the darker areas where the body or the fur needs to be darker, adding some more of those shadows, or working with a pencil eraser. So now I'm working with a Koh-i-Noor pencil eraser, and I'm going to draw some lighter marks on top of those darker areas. And what that'll do, it'll make the fur appear more three-dimensional, because those lighter marks will look like lighter clumps of fur which are sticking out and which are therefore closer to the light source. I also did a little bit of work on that tail to make it a bit lighter and to create a little bit of additional contrast. From the reference I can tell the deer's fur is a little bit wet, and I'm going to try to imitate that effect. Also, if you examine the reference, you will see that there are some lighter portions of fur, or portions of lighter fur in some parts of the body, like for example around the knee area, on the legs, around the belly area, around the backside area, and some others. So when shading and when doing the texture of the fur, I need to keep that in mind, and occasionally I will also need to go back in and maybe remove a little bit of texture so that I can retain that appearance of the fur and that distribution of lighter and darker fur, so that I would capture the likeness of the animal. I've already done a number of drawings of similar animals. I've drawn moose, elk, deer. This, like I said, is a drawing of, or is supposed to be a drawing of a white-tailed deer. And a little bit later I will also be doing a drawing of another elk. So I'm doing that series of drawings of wildlife, and they're all in charcoal. It'll soon be done, just a few more. So as you can see, I'm doing a lot of refining, switching back and forth between a pencil eraser and a pencil, and occasionally using a little bit of brush work to soften some of that texture. For the background, I mostly used a piece of vine charcoal. Vine charcoal is soft natural charcoal that comes in sticks of irregular shape. I don't really know the brand of the vine charcoal that I'm using here, but they do differ a little bit because some of them are a little bit more scratchy than others. I prefer to use ones which are softer and which will give you softer marks. Those are also more easily erased, but at the same time they're more easily manipulated, so you can easily remove or take away value or add more if you need. Here on the left side I'm adding a few more trees because I wanted to fill in that part of the background as well, just for the sake of balance, I suppose. And I'm softening that with a brush. Now the effect that I will try to create is I will try to fade the lower edge of those trees a little bit as if it's a slightly foggy scene, but I'll get to that later. Right now I'm adding some more details on the head and mostly the nose and the mouth area, which is darker, which is why I switched to my charcoal pencil, because these are some of the darkest details on the animal's body. So you can tell that for the most part I'm using a charcoal pencil as a drawing tool on my main subject, but for some of the details and for some of the finer textures I switched to the Koh-i-Noor black pencil. And even when I've done most of the work on the texture of the fur, occasionally I will go back in and draw some of those darker spots, darker details, because that increases the feeling of depth in the fur. The fur is very short on the head, which is why to create that illusion of short fur, I simply dragged my pencil in circular motions, trying to create a texture that looks like really, really short fur. It's a lot quicker and easier than drawing a bunch of dots, because you would have to draw a bunch of dots rather than lines in order to create that illusion of really short fur. But like I said, the quicker way to do that is simply to drag your pencil, and then the charcoal pencil creates that nice fine texture as it interacts with the texture of the paper. I'm still going to be doing a lot of refining on the headlight. Right now it looks a little bit dark, so I'm going to have to go back in and pull some lighter details with a pencil eraser. So like I've already explained, I keep going back and forth with a pencil and a pencil eraser. That's because the pencil eraser draws lighter marks, and the black pencil and the charcoal pencil, it draws darker marks. So I'm kind of going back and forth between adding and taking away value where needed. I did a little bit of work on the background, and now I'm adding some more value to the background on the left side. There is a portion of lighter fur just under the head, on the throat area, and I need that to stand out. Right now it looks a little bit blurry, and I blurred the transition between that field and those trees in the background, and I kind of want it that way because I don't want a clean line there. I think it would be a little bit too distracting. I just want to fade the edges of those trees a little bit so that we have a smoother transition, so that it looks like kind of like a haze or mist in the distance. And I want those softer, less defined shapes in the background because I need the main subject to be a lot more detailed and a lot better defined so that it would stand out against that blurry, out of focus background. So like I said, there is a patch of lighter fur there on the throat area, and in order to clean it up, to bring back that lighter value, I will simply switch to a kneaded eraser, which can sometimes be much more effective than a pencil eraser, because you just dab those areas which need to be lighter and you lift up a little bit of value, and the kneaded eraser doesn't smudge and doesn't leave residue, which is very good when you just want to lift up a little bit of charcoal and make something a little bit lighter without creating a mess. So now that I've lifted up a bit of charcoal from those portions of lighter fur, I've really increased the range of value, and my main subject is starting to look a lot more three-dimensional, which is very important if you want to describe the shape of the animal to the viewer. I'm doing some more refining, cleaning up some of the edges, adding some finer details, defining the anatomy of the animal a little bit better, adding some shadows, like for example that shadow between the neck and the rest of the body, and basically just refining the details on the main subject. On the background here at the bottom, I'm going to do a little bit of work because I'm going to draw some darker grass under the animal, because the animal's body will be casting a bit of a shadow down onto that grass, so the grass in that area is going to appear darker. And I did that work with vine charcoal, and I blended it and softened it with a brush. Sometimes as you're blending, you will blur some of the edges between the main subject and the background. Sometimes you may want to achieve such an effect, but most of the time I will want to create a clean edge between the main subject and the background, which is why I will clean up the edges either by using erasers or by using a pencil. Sometimes you can, here I'm drawing some grass, some lighter grass by using a pencil eraser. Sometimes you can just draw lighter shapes by using a brush, because vine charcoal is very easy to remove, so all you have to do is use a clean brush, and if it lifts up a little bit of charcoal, just like in watercolor. So with vine charcoal you can create these painterly effects. Now here I really wanted to clean up the tips of those antlers so that they would really stand out against that background. Now that all of that work on the background is done, I'm going back in and just trying to increase that contrast and clean up those edges. And you can see that as I'm putting down those finishing touches, I'm really getting a lot of contrast. So I decided to make the antlers a little bit lighter than they are actually in the reference photo, because sometimes you have to deviate from your reference a little bit so that you would achieve certain effects. So in order to enhance contrast in certain areas, sometimes you need to make certain parts of your main subject a little bit lighter, sometimes a little bit darker. You have to allow yourself a little bit of artistic license in order to create certain effects. After all, you don't have to stick to your reference photo religiously. It's more like a guideline, I suppose. Anyway, I'm doing some final work here at the bottom, drawing some lighter grass there, and I'm going to put my signature in the lower right part of the drawing. The drawing is now done. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Also, don't forget to check out my other videos. For longer videos and more content, you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye bye.